but today we have an exciting special guest of Dr. Nick. So welcome to the Tech Talk with Bram and Dr. Nick. Today we are going to do a high-level overview and a bit of a deep dive into the new proof of space format and the associated new plot format plans. Dr. Nick, I know you wanted to do a immediate shout out regarding your connection, so I'll turn that over to you here.
Oh yeah, my connection is a little bit spotty, so if at some point I turn off my video, it's just so that I don't break out. So if I do disconnect, I'll come back in, but maybe when I get into some lengthy explanation, I'll just kind of turn off the video so that we make sure that I don't get cut off.
Thank you. Thank you. And for those joining us in the participant pool, thank you for taking the time today. If you do have questions for Bram or Dr. Nick, please ask them inside of the Zoom Q&A or use the Discord server's community feedback channel. We do not monitor any questions on YouTube, so please use either the Zoom Q&A or the Discord server in order to ask your questions. That being said, let's go ahead and start with a high-level overview. So, Bram, can you elaborate on what is the primary goal of the new proof of space format and how does it differ from the original?
So the goals of the new proof of space format are the same as the goals of the original proof of space format. We're trying to make a really good proof of space. We have found problems with the old proof of space format, specifically in terms of there being, two categories of them. The most obvious set of issues are there are time-space trade-offs that Dr. Nick and others went and found. And so those time-space trade-offs are being used in the wild, which is causing there to be more electricity use in farming than we would like for there to be, and there to be more economies of scale in doing it than we would like for there to be. So we wish to make that not be the case anymore and get back to our original goals of the whole thing. Sort of unrelated to that, when we made the proof of space format in the first place, there was a whole lot of emphasis on information theoretic compression that could happen in it, and worries that someone would have some information theoretic type thing, just better normal compression, than other people and get advantage with that. And we really, tried to squeeze all the blood from the stone with that one. And the attacks that people have done in the wild, essentially none of them have been of that nature at all, because, well, we defended against it very well, but did not defend nearly as well against these like bit dropping hinting type attacks, which is what people are doing. However, we've since figured out how to squeeze a little bit more blood from the stone. And so there's also some just straight up compression improvements that are in the new plot format, including things that we actually don't know really how to do them in a practical way, but it's a really good idea to make it so that the intended plot form, so that the proof of space format is designed in such a way that there is an intended plot format which really gets all the theoretical compression that you're aware of to make it so nobody can do better, which is also good against hinting attacks, because if you have that property, if you then start deviating from that given format in like the slightest, you're paying a huge penalty. So that's that's a high level what we're doing with it.
Thank you. Thank you. And as you mentioned, a lot of the focus here is to work with those different bit dropping concepts, as well as the new hot topic, which are rental attacks. And Dr. Nick, I know you have a lot of experience looking at these various attacks and how they can be affected by different security implementations. Do you mind diving into some of the specific security improvements in this new proof of space format and how that relates to rental attacks?
Sure. So the most obvious way to do the rental attack is just to kind of plot, like grind the whole plot, and that was much too fast in the old format, in the original format. So that was getting down to I think Docker Plotter does phase 1 in about 20 seconds for a 4090. And then the H100, like a cluster of those, is then under 1 second. So what the new format is doing
when we
on
first
the-
made it, we didn't have any GPU implementation at all. So it turns out GPUs are really fast.
Yeah, so the most obvious way to like counter that is to make plotting much like more intensive so that it takes much longer. And so the plan here is to have the plotting time be an order of magnitude like slower. And then the other thing is the plot ID filter can also affect the rental attack. So we will lower the plot ID so that, you know, when a challenge does come in, you're going to have to then grind plots more often. And then there's also a second filter there that's not in the original, which is a scan filter. And then that one also forces you to kind of grind the whole plot, but then it might actually throw out the plot. So the plot ID filter combined with the scan filter will then offer another order of magnitude. And so we're about 2 order of magnitudes more secure in the new format than before. And basically what that means is that if you have like at some point in the future, if it's possible to attack the network because all this AI boom that we have, and if that kind of slows down a little bit, then we get all these cheap GPUs online, then, you know, it would be, you know, conceivably feasible to be able to, you know, rent all these GPUs in mass for like $10 million an hour. But with these 2 orders of magnitude, that's now going to be like $1 billion per hour if we ever get to that point. And the same thing for a company like Meta, where they have thousands of GPUs available. You know, now we'd need like a company like 100 Meta companies to be able to do kind of any sort of rental attack. So we're in a much better position there. There's also things where for rental attacks, you can store a little bit of data to do the rental attack. And like one of those aspects is to basically take the Y values of the very last table, then you're just like saving a little bit of information. And you can check to see, you know, whether or not you actually need to do the grinding. And one other alternative is to store some information that's in the T2 table. But the way the third filter also comes in is you're basically forced to grind the whole plot in order to get to the very last filter. And we have no more last Y value in the last table. So any of these attacks that kind of go from the back end they just won't work anymore. So we're in a much better position than before in terms of the rental attacks.
Thank you. Thank you. And definitely seems like it's well thought out. And I know you've been alluding to a tool that might be able to help other people see some of these different attack parameters and why you've chosen some of the settings that you have as well. So I know a lot of people are intrigued to see that once we do have the time to get that out into the public. Now, Bram,
we've been iterating on that because the number of relevant attacks that we were worried about when we first started this was larger. So we've come up with a bunch of techniques which make it so that there's essentially almost no hinting attacks that work anymore that seem to work in the slightest against our latest plans. So the tool's going to have a lot fewer parameters to twiddle on it, and fewer relevant attacks that's looking at. It's basically just going to be like things along the lines of how effective is a rental attack, how effective is bit dropping, and how expensive is plotting, and how long is verification, those kinds of things.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to touch on one of the last aspects you mentioned there, which is the expensive plotting and essentially how things are going to affect the farmers themselves. Because as everybody knows, a new proof of space format and associated plot formats means farmers are going to have to replot. And we also have a associated question from Yanni Tarvanian here. But the core question is, how does this affect farmers in the long run? And what kind of incentives are they going to be given to replot over time?
Well, the incentive is they have to. That's going to phase in slowly. First off, in terms of what's good for just everyone, is in the steady state after the transition. If we just assume that all farmers just sort of replot, right? And just assume that's simplistic case. Then then farmers have this one-time cost of the replotting, but after they're done with that, everyone who was doing compression before is not burning all this, not spending all this money on electricity anymore. It's just, there's much less opportunity to do that with the new format than with the old format. And overall, the network's healthier. The Nakamoto coefficient will naturally tend to go up. And the amount of net space will be much clearer because there aren't varying levels of compression being run everywhere. So that's just sort of the ecosystem, and everything will be a lot healthier. There will be a little bit of shuffling around. It might be that, obvious thing, farmers who were running at higher levels of compression before are not going to have that much advantage over other farmers after the changeover. Of course, they're also not using up electricity. So where they're at, I don't know. But so there will be a little bit of some people getting a little advantage, some people getting a little disadvantage. Hopefully, mostly people are, almost everyone is on net better off after the transition. So in terms of the immediate incentive, if we just ignore the planning part of this, and for any one farmer, we just assume that the plan is going forward as presented. What's going to happen for them is that there's going to be this transition period from the old to the new format. So the plan is there's going to be a lock-in date, which is when we say, okay, this is happening now. And the significance of the lock-in date is that's when the software that we ship from Chia.net is going to have the hard fork turned on by default. And that's the point where it's like, okay, everybody, this has been decided that this is happening and everybody should upgrade. Okay. And the idea is that we've put out something that's good enough that that for the most part, people aren't terribly upset about this, that there's broad support for doing this clear improvement to the whole thing. Then sometime after that, after people have had enough time to upgrade, then there is the activation date. So on the activation date, that's when the actual format changes. So all blocks are going to change there, because like the proofs of space and time are going to not be directly inlined anymore in blocks, because that was stupid. Just the hashes of them will be included, but so the format will change, but you won't yet see new format proofs of space going in. Or I mean, someone might decide to try and be the very first person, just day one, I'm going to get my proof of space in. But what's going to happen there is your probably new proof of space format plots are going to be very slightly disfavored at the very beginning of the changeover. And then over time, there's just going to be this multiplier on the effectiveness of old format plots. So they have some quality, and if the quality passes a threshold, you get to make a block. And so over the course of the transition period, the quality on old format proofs is going to be multiplied by an amount that's going to just kind of linearly go down from 1 to 0 over the course of the transition period. And so at the very end of that, they're just gone. They just don't work anymore.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know a lot of people out there are wondering, why is it 2 years? And, we have these different periods, as you noted, for allowing people to upgrade, then enough time frame for the activation, and then, of course, the phase in and phase out of the new plot formats or proof of space formats. What was the rationale behind the timeline there?
Well, there's certain things that we can't really change all that much, so we need to get this implemented, right? We don't have the new thing implemented yet. We have it mostly planned out at this point. but not 100% finalized. And we are likely to twiddle our spec by like maybe a bit or two in places once we have an actual implementation is my expectation. And by the way, I personally am working on coding on this right now as part of this process. So we need to get an implementation done and put out a chip for it and have some amount of time for there to be community feedback on that. And then once it's decided, okay, this is good, there needs to be that gap between the lock-in date and the activation date. And because everyone who does not upgrade there is going to have a real disaster on their hands, we really want that to be a significant amount of time. So we've been talking about that being 6 months there. The amount of time for the transition period, we sort of gone back and forth on. I initially said 6 months. When I first said that, people kind of freaked out a little. But I think, you know, some of the feedback when we did our blog post the other day, there was like more feedback along the lines of, hey, this isn't so bad because like replotting is really not that expensive and it's really plenty of time to do it, right? There's nothing weird going on here. And if you have to replot at some point during the thing, it doesn't really matter when it is, like how long the period is, so long as it's not so short that that you have trouble actually just getting the replotting done in time, right? If you have a big farm. So we're intentionally making it so that replotting is pretty friendly to normal GPUs. It's a question of what this means. Friendly normal GPUs. It intentionally costs something, but compared to like what an ASIC could do, the GPU is being very efficient. So, but that a normal GPU can do it that without just getting hurt on the edges. We might go with 6 months. I've told people I don't want to hear. Just for the sake of coherence of discussion, I really don't want to even consider any transition plans other than it being like this just nice linear multiplier from 1 down to 0 that goes down to 0 in either 3 months, 6 months, or 1 year. Those are sort of the 3 options that we might do. And I don't even want to contemplate anything else because almost anything else you might want to discuss doing is close enough to one of those 3 that we should just round off to that.
Most certainly. Yeah, thank you very much. And it'll definitely be important to ensure that everybody has the time to replot and especially replot at their own pace based on the size of their farms as well. So
yeah, the idea is that we want it to be that we don't want everything going offline while everyone just crazily replots in just the same day. So we want just sort of an even period, and you know, people with different amounts of compression, it's going to make sense for them to replot sooner or later based on how much compression they have going on. I think it's, you know, very good for the health of the ecosystem for this to go through as quickly as possible. So I would generally favor a shorter thing, but we're not talking all that huge of differences here on the margin. I feel a lot of pressure right now to get everything implemented as quickly as possible because that is something I do have some control over, and you know, software is notoriously difficult to write under time pressure, especially super technical stuff like we're working on right now. However, I do feel like we have a good handle on all the really crazy technical aspects of it. We have a pretty good idea what we're doing there. The biggest issue right now actually is that we talked before about there being 2 different formats, one for HD and one for SSD. It looks like we might be able to get away with just having the same one everywhere, where that this is dependent on this is dependent on 2 things. Number 1, getting the amounts of seeks low enough that an HD can handle it just fine, which may be doable. And number 2, we need to actually make the finished compression implementation, which we have not done yet. That's what I personally am working on right now. That's some pretty fancy stuff right now, right there. So it's really fun working on it, but it is one of those like, oh boy, what have we got ourselves into kind of a things. But definitely if we can do that, that actually has some benefits because we might like, For example, we might make it so that when you're walking up the tree, that the way challenges work, we might make it so that the actual direction that you walk up is randomized. If we just use Binesh everywhere, that would be a really great thing to have because it's just better for security.
Thank you, and definitely exciting turn of events there if we can get both of those formats and consolidate it into one and have it work on both HDDs and also SSDs.
Well, that makes it so that you don't pay like a 20% penalty for using HD versus SSD. So, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And an exciting opportunity to add the ability to run up the tree randomly rather than having the direct pointers that would have been required without the Binesh.
The reason why that's good is a little involved to explain. Binesh compression has this really neat property that it's kind of like a bidirectional hash table. That not only can you look up values in the forward direction quickly, you can look at values in the reverse direction quickly. And I mean, you can build this normally because you could just make two hash tables, one of which points backwards, which is how you normally do it. But that makes everything twice as big. And Binesh network does not. And in fact, there's this other compression that we can do in the Binesh network that, you know, squeezes a few more bits out here and there in really not very intuitive ways, but yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the high level overview of that as well. And now, Nick, I know you answered this already in text, but I'm going to go ahead and ask the question and have you answer it here as well. It's a question in the Zoom Q&A, which is, any guesses where the bottleneck for plotting would be? Is it RAM, GPU compute, GPU RAM bandwidth? Essentially, where is that going to fit within the plotting side of the equation?
Well, it's most of the work is in the matching algorithm, and that's a pretty memory hard algorithm. And so if your GPU RAM bandwidth is higher, you should be able to solve that quicker. So in terms of like the difference in the 3090 and the 4090, that's not such a big difference because a lot of those lookups, the bandwidth for the 4090 is very similar to the 3090. So if the 5090 comes out with a much higher like RAM bandwidth, then you might see some speed up there. But in terms of like the PCIe lane, since most of that time is done inside the GPU and lookups inside the GPU onboard RAM, then the PCIe is going to have less of an effect as it did before because the time to transfer will be relatively less important or like less weight versus the actual solving time as it's constructing the data.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, definitely a lot of details in there. And as you mentioned previously, there's a lot of things that you're working with that affect a lot of parameters you're working with that'll affect that end plotting and then also the farming in the long run. I just want to take one step back here and do another high level question to address the minds behind the new proof of space format and the new plot format. Bram, do you mind going through who's been on the team, who's been involved within the discussions for creating this new proof of space format?
Yeah, so first off, have to credit Max, who told us about some attacks and also filled us in on his plans for how to be resistant to attacks. So, and then in terms of the people who have really actually been working on our enhancements here, that would be me and Nick, obviously, and then Christoph Piechak, who I collaborated with on making our proof of space format to begin with. And then Harold is doing a lot of implementation and trying stuff there. And Rohan is helping out with implementation as well. So from a design standpoint, it's mostly me and Nick and Christoph.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, definitely a brilliant team behind it and certainly the right minds to have the expertise to build out solutions that are needed in this regard.
Yeah, in terms of expertise on attacks here and such, it's kind of like Nick knows a lot more about hinting than I do, and I'm much more on the theoretical compression side of things.
Thank you. Thank you. And touching on, hinting or the matching algorithm as it is, Nick, do you mind going into detail as to what the new matching algorithm is and how that affects security?
This might be a better question for Bram, actually,
Yeah,
because
I think I should probably answer this.
we
So
we started with it, but you go ahead, Bram, and
yeah,
talk about
so it turns out in our old format, we had thought that intuitively it seems like all the security is kind of coming from the number of things that you have, and so like your original like first table G functions are really the source of security, and everything later is just kind of collating that. It turns out that's not true at all. And so our old format actually is getting a lot of its remaining security off of the matching function, which is interesting because that wasn't really designed to do that in the first place. It was designed specifically to get to not have any short cycles in it. But it is in fact providing the security. So the question is, hey, could we make something that's more intentionally designed around whatever it is that this is doing to provide good security? So what we're doing, so the problem, so there's there's one really big benefit here. So I looked into adding security by making the G functions quite expensive and cranking up the size of metadata all the way through the thing, which is Max's thought, which is a reasonable thought. This is a few big problems. One of them is it is directly increasing the cost of plotting, because that's a lot more metadata that you're just plowing through the whole thing as you're doing the plotting process. So it's increasing resources to do a plot. The other thing is that it is directly increasing the cost of validating proofs of space, because you're making it quite expensive to generate your original G functions. So verifying them is also expensive. And the matching function has this nice property that you can just sort of look at two things and validate comparing them and see if it's good. So it does not increase those costs, which is obviously a very nice property for things to have. We really want to not make it totally outrageously expensive to validate the historical blockchain. And so, yeah, and another benefit is that it's kind of by putting some security in the matching function, you're kind of smearing it over the entire process of the thing. So it's hard to kind of specifically attack individual bits of what's going on here. And you can make it memory hard. Our original matching function actually did something pretty counterproductive, which is we were trying to make it fast. So we intentionally made it so that there was very good locality when doing it. And now that we're actually viewing this as a thing for security, we're intentionally making it so that the matching function requires doing lookups all over the place in memory. And actually, we're probably even pulling out the match index bits so that they sit off to the side and need to be included as sort of extras in the proof of space. Yeah, that might have been a lot of jargon that I just said, so sorry if that was hard to understand. But that's kind of high level overview of what we're getting out of the new matching algorithm.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it definitely more of a detailed topic there, and I'm sure more information will come out during the chip process where people can digest a lot of that information and provide text-based questions as well. So thank you. I really appreciate you diving into that. And Nick, I am going to throw one your way here, though. Let's talk about the hardware requirements for plotting and harvesting with the new format. Can you give the current estimates as to what type of hardware the end farmers would end up needing?
So this is more related to what's practical for farmers, because we could just have plotting be like ridiculously expensive and take a ridiculously long time than have all the compression resistance we need. But we got to set a boundary somewhere, and that's something that I'll also look to the community for in terms of, you know, hey guys, what is an acceptable plotting time that you want to have, and you know, realize that the shorter that plotting time is, and then maybe the more compression is allowed, and then there might be some splits between farmers who do a little bit of compression and farmers that don't do any. So from a from an acceptable standpoint, I started with basically the right time to disk that it would take for, let's say, 100 gigabyte plot, so that when we're generating a plot on a budget piece of hardware, like let's say an NVIDIA 3060, that's going to take around about the same time that it would take to write the disk. So that should be around about 11 minutes or so. So that's sort of where our starting base is. And the higher end GPUs like the 3090 or the 4090, they're going to cut that time a little bit down. And then there's obviously a limit to how short we can make the plotting time because of the rental attacks. We still want enough security there from just the plotting time in general. So yeah, it's for people that have big farms, the better GPUs will get you there faster to replot. But then for a lot of farmers that just have like, you know, a few spare hard drives and so on, then I think the budget GPUs will plot enough speed for them, like that's not going to be such a hindrance for them to get their farm replotted. And then we'll still support CPUs just for those rare cases of users where they just want to test a couple of plots, or just do like 2 or 3 because they just have an old system there and they just want to, you know, just support a network with a few plots there. Yeah, and it's sort of a moving target, and it's going to be based a lot more on the feedback we have. And then when we have more of our benchmarks in, and then I'll be able to analyze like how much security is compromised by easing the hardware requirements. And then we'll have that tool that is going to come out that people can play with. And then that'll open up a lot more discussion on, oh, you know what, let's make this plotting quicker, or let's make it longer, or let's reduce some RAM requirements, or things like that. But we're going to do our best to make it at least the most reasonable target that we have.
Yeah, there's this a fundamental set of trade-offs here, because when it comes to plotting, you want it to be like easy for honest farmers and then hard for attackers, and obviously you can't really do that. It's some amount of difficulty for everyone, so you could kind of play around with subtle aspects of this, but definitely some trade-offs there.
Absolutely. And going a little bit more in depth into those trade-offs, as we've been discussing, there are various parameters that you two have been looking at and tweaking to figure out what that difficulty should be and what are the security trade-offs. The question we have in the Zoom Q&A is, how is that affected in the long run? The specific question was, are you planning to make it such that less secure plots could be removed through a soft fork in case plot grinding became viable again due to advancements in GPU? But I would also like to change that question a little bit to ask, what are those other parameters that are going to be in place, such as the plot filter and the other filters that we've discussed, and how are those going to affect security in the long run? And then how does that feed back to the farmer themselves?
Yeah, so the plot filter is kind of an easy one. You know, we've talked about having these parameters in place to make it so that a future change could be a soft fork instead of a hard fork. That I'm not sure how I feel about that right now. In principle, that sounds good, but it's a lot of complex code that's never touched that might, for all practical purposes, be like a hard fork, because a lot of people aren't going to support it yet when the time comes to do it. Playing games with the filter is much easier, actually. So what we've learned from past experience is what you really want to do with the filter is have the filter on a schedule just go down to nothing, to there being no filter anymore. The problem with the filter is you kind of want to make the filter less aggressive if you are trying to improve security. And if you just have it set to a particular value for all time, that's a hard fork to do. So what you kind of want to do is set it so that the filter is preset to go down to nothing on a fixed schedule. And then if you decide that you don't want it to do that, then you soft fork in, pushing out that schedule. And you can just kind of continue pushing out that schedule over and over again for all time if you never really want to do that. So that's the sane and appropriate way of dealing with the filter. So we definitely should do that. Now that we understand that one better. That one's nice because it doesn't actually change anything about the plot format itself, where those other kind of soft forks would require replotting and everything. And I'm feeling much less confident about how good of an idea it is to allow soft forkage there, because as a matter of practice, it would require everyone upgrade anyway. And it's really hard to say, if we have to move off this format in the future, what would the reason be, right? So one thing we are going to be supporting are different K sizes. So it's looking likely that we're probably going to be supporting like in the range K30 to K34, something like that. And not really going above that. But K34 is pretty big. Yeah. So, so that's, so then an obvious soft fork would be just, disallow K30s or something like that in the future. But I have very little confidence that would actually be what we would need. It's very hard to predict. Like, what we're building right now seems to be very, very good, right? So there's a lot of, it can withstand a lot of changes and things. So if everything changes, 50 years from now, parameters have moved so much that it makes sense to do something about this. It's very, very hard to predict the direction that might be. So I don't have all that much confidence in the ability to predict what parameters should be used. But definitely should do that plot filter thing. that one we're definitely doing.
I also just wanted to add, for the farmers that are concerned about the plot filter changing and having to do any replots, so it's more of a safeguard that we have a soft fork option in the future. Like the way the plot filters have been structured now is that the number of different attacks that can happen on the plot is much reduced. So in the old format, all these attacks were working on the last table and the Y values from the last table. And because of challenges coming in the last table, there was so much flexibility in how you could structure the attacks for the rest of the plot, that in the new challenge, it's going to go on the X values. And then we're really basically pushing the attackers into basically two choices. You can bid drop here or you can bid drop there. And then how much they bid drop is going to basically double the recompute necessary. So it's much more predictable how far the bid dropping is going to be able to go. And so we know that if new GPUs come out, there's maybe like one extra bit that you can drop, but at the same time, the storage requirements might get cheaper and the energy cost of storage might also get cheaper. And so it may like actually never be necessary to introduce an extra or like hard tighten the filter if the balance between the GPUs and the storage costs and so on kind of go in step together, like towards the future. And so that's one difference between this format and the old one, is that we're kind of at the cutting edge of the technology for the bit dropping. So we're not going to see every 3 months there's some new technology that comes out. Then there's a big leap in compression. So then, we're not going to have to, at least the expectations, we're not going to need to have a plot filter adjustment to deal with new technology that comes out, because we're hoping that we're already there at the front.
Yeah, the new format, it's already going to be compressed so ludicrously just in the standard format that there really isn't that much more you can do. That just there's this information theoretic stuff to drop, and then and that's all just gone. It's already just compressed. so many ludicrous things. It's specifically designed to allow that compression to happen. And then in particular, making it so that the challenges come not just from the final table, but from this particularly tricky way of looking things up on the final table, makes it so that playing games with hints really just doesn't work anymore. So you're kind of in this regime where you can drop bits, but effectively what happens is a proof is sort of 200 bits long, roughly. I mean, the proofs are actually much bigger than that, but in the abstract, if you're thinking about a bit drop attack, it's a proof is 200 bits long. And it's kind of either the case, this is something we're working on right now, that like whenever you drop a bit, it's either kind of like 1 bit drop is like dropping 1 bit out of 200, or maybe if you're able to be clever, you can drop 2 bits for the same factor of 2, right? So if you drop 1 bit, you just have a factor of 2 multiplier in how much work you have to do to reconstruct things, because you have to try both cases for what that bit could have been. And if you, there are kind of these meet in the middle things where sometimes you can drop 2 bits for at the cost of a factor of 2 of the compute that you want to do. This is something we're working on right now, actually. It's looking like we can make that very, very painful. Like, so yeah, so we're really obsessively trying to make this as good as we possibly can. But it's something along the lines of every time you drop, you can, at the cost of doubling the amount of compute you have to do, you can compress by 0.5% or maybe 1%. That's kind of roughly where things are. And we're going to make it so that our intended honest farm format is already doing a fair amount of this. So it will be doing an amount of compute that's fairly trivial, but a good starting point on the exponential growth curve.
Yeah, thank you very much. Definitely a detailed overview into that topic, and I think it leads us directly into a couple of questions that we have in the Zoom Q&A. For those of us just joining, we are going to stop at the top of the hour here. We do have a hard stop. If you have any questions, please do add them into the Zoom Q&A or post them in the Discord community feedback channel. We do not monitor YouTube for any of the questions, so please use one of the other 2 locations. And back to kind of those different forms of compression, those different types of attacks, we have a question regarding the new plot format and the associated proof of space format. Wouldn't it just be a cat and mouse game to chase and they call it the next ASIC, but of course we're seeing different compression mechanisms outside of ASICs here. Can you actually make a format that would be truly invulnerable to any future ASIC?
There's 2 components to this question. That the attacks that we've been seeing on our old thing, we can kind of put them into sort of 2 categories of things that can happen. One is GPUs. GPU implementations have happened, and GPUs are really, really fast, right? So that affects a bunch of things there. And the other one is these hinting attacks, where you store different data than was meant to be stored, but it's data where you can do a bunch of grinding and reconstruct what you want without all that much computational cost. Because our original format really didn't take grinding into account, and the intended format had 0 grinding and just honest space, which is obviously that's not your final steady state. You need something, getting the exponential curve started as your just sort of normal usage that everyone does. We now understand the algorithmic aspects of hinting attacks much, much better. We really had no idea about them before. And this is a math thing, and math doesn't change, right? There's no, no matter what the hardware does, the math behind these is not altering. So, what happened was we put this, giant prize pool of millions of dollars on finding improvements here. So people did. That's what happens, right? So there may be future compressive things that happen. I'm not terribly worried about it at this point. I think we've really got a good handle on what types of things it is that are done with hinting and how that can be defended against, and how there could be other, just different compressy things that can happen. Yes. So from an algorithmic standpoint, we seem to have the situation under control, and the things that we're doing to defend here just look pretty reasonable in terms of how we're doing it. The new match algorithm and looking up from the final table leaves are just very natural things to do once you realize that that's how you should do them. And just feel like very subtle differences from what we started with, to the point of, hey, maybe we could have just done that in our initial release, and we just realized that was a good idea. The thing that we can't really predict is hardware, right? So the potential concern is if things slide in a way where, like, just straight up grinding, just reconstructing whole plots over and over again becomes cheaper than space does, right? That's the potential concern when you're talking over very long periods of time. So, and that, the playing games with the filter directly defends against those things. But there might be, I mean, you have concerns of, like, what if we get to the point where even with the filter just drops completely? We're still having these attacks, then we might have to do something at some point in the future. But yeah, I have a pretty high confidence that nothing calamitous will happen algorithmically after this, because really what's happened is there's a whole category of things to be concerned about, and we're doing generic defenses against that whole category of things. And that feels really good. But the thing that's hard to do is talking about, like, what are costs, like, how good are GPUs going to be, and what are they going to look like, and how expensive is storage 100 years from now? And what are the ratios between those going? Well, there's that's a really long time. Yeah, I don't want to be too confident here, because we did with our original proof of space, we hoped we wouldn't have to do this process of updating it. But all things considered, the old proof of space is holding up pretty well. It is still a proof of space format, even with, over 50% compression. There's still, the space is still basically the hero of the show, but we want it. We want to do better than what we're at right now. So so I do feel a bit embarrassed about that, not about having to go through this process. But it and because it's happened once, maybe it could happen again. But it does feel like what's happened is there's just this whole category of there being hinting to help with grinding that we just didn't properly investigate at all when we started, and that's now been pretty thoroughly investigated, and we're putting appropriate defenses in place. So I can't make any 100% promises, but we are hoping that, ideally this new proof of space format is good for decades to come. And looking like we have a pretty good shot at that here.
Thank you. Yeah, great to hear. And it's also a interesting insight to hear about the general defense concept rather than we're focused on fixing against specific attacks. So definitely a great approach there as well. Now, tied into that is obviously the increased plotting requirements are going to leave some farmers with the inability to fill their space with their current hardware. And there's a lot of thought that there might be plotting services provided, and also a potential future where you might have a service that essentially plots in the background for you with embedded hardware. Do you mind talking about different concepts and visions as to how these more hardened plotting techniques might come about, or how we might see them in the wild?
Oh, one thing I should put in here is we're still figuring out for Bish compression. I said we were hoping to do that for everything. One of the questions with Bish compression is how painful it is to make the Waxman bits. And I think we can make this pretty well optimized. That's very memory hard, but there's not a huge amount of compute in it. It's just, it has potential pain because when you're trying to multi-thread it, because you have a lot of threads all hammering on the same thing. I think we can get away with actually being able to do it efficiently because there's a way of multi-threading it where even though everything is hammering on the exact same memory, they can actually leave the memory in an unsafe form and just keep hammering on it, and it will work fine anyway. That's sounds like a strange thing to say, but I think we could do that. That's something we're working on right this minute, actually. We really, really want to find out the viability of this. So we need to get to the bottom of the amount of pain involved there. But I wanted to put that caveat in, but the further details, I think probably Nick should take over on talking about that.
In terms of embedded hardware, I'm not entirely sure like when that would be able to be done. I think that's going to be tricky, but I'm not really in the space to be able to answer that like properly. So that's probably more for a different member of the Chia team to be able to answer.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And also,
I think costs of plotting are not going to be all that substantially different from the costs of plotting old format plots. It's going to be, you know, like within an order of magnitude, kind of a, or maybe a little outside of an order of magnitude, that kind of neighborhood maybe, of costs, and you'll have the ability to do it at your leisure over the transition period. So
yeah, we are going to make sure that most of the costs for plotting are going to be entirely reasonable, and the Bish compression that Bram is working on is probably one of the hardest constraints that we have right now. So I think that's why he was trying to elaborate on the details of trying to get that working efficiently. And we would like to support just Bish across all the formats, so we won't have like an HDD friendly format, but that's still up in the air to make sure that this Bish compression can be done in a reasonable time for most computers. So that's why this is a little bit difficult to answer right now in terms of like exactly how low of a spec we can go, because we'd really like to have just one format.
yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I think the hidden question inside of plotting services and the concept of how various members might be able to replot if they don't have that hardware is bandwidth requirements. And previously, trying to push through a 100 gig plot just wasn't reasonable. But now that K30s might be an option and lower plot sizes, that might reopen the doors to that. What other thoughts do you guys have regarding different entities that might set up plotting services through a bandwidth requirement or even a ship?
Bandwidth requirements are a lot better actually, because it's looking like our plan right now is to support K30s, and which obviously K30s are nice because if you have a little bit of space, it's easier to shove a K30 in there. It makes your minimum space smaller. It might be for reasons. It might be that actually the bandwidth, the memory requirements of a K30 might be similar to others for security reasons, but they'll all be very, very under control. Like really actually kind of low end systems amounts of memory. We do have this throughput benefit that it's looking like, because of the new matching algorithm, the security is kind of spread out everywhere, which means that we don't need to have crazy amounts of metadata coming from the first table. So we'll probably be able to get away with like 64 bits of metadata instead of like 256 all the way through. And so that like reduces your just overall throughput like to and from disk as you're doing stuff by like, a factor of 4 right there. So yeah, so most likely the general throughput requirements of plotting are going to be much more under control.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We do have a high-level question in the Discord, which is, what do existing and potential customers think about the plot format? And essentially the high-level version is, do changes to the proof of space and plot formats have any effect on business customers from the CNI perspective?
No. I think that the high level benefits of the new format are that the Nakamoto coefficient should go up as a result of it being rolled out, and get a little bit better visibility into overall space, and yeah, those are the big benefits. So it's just sort of good in general. People are going to have to upgrade their software, but it's just a minor upgrade. It's not changing anything deep about how wallet stuff is working. The actual format of transactions and such is completely and totally unaffected. So yeah, most people are going to have almost no cognizance of this at all. It's just an upgrade that you need to do.
Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate that. And I know Gene's in there also answering inside of the Discord server as well. The two topics that became hot topics recently that I'm hoping we could briefly touch on are the various things that Dr. Yang had been bringing up in the Discord server, and then of course FPGAs. And what are kind of high-level thoughts regarding those two topics?
Okay, we think that Dr. Yang has, in total fairness, figured out a real thing that can be done, but we think it's something that we are already kind of pretty cognizant of, that something can be improved. So if Dr. Yang wants to contribute in some way, helping out, I would really like him to do that. He's been overplaying the value of what he has right now and asking for way too much for it. So he should he should not do that. But I don't think he doesn't know anything, and I would like for him to work with us productively. The FPGA thing appears to just be an outright scam. That a bunch of brand new accounts speaking broken English, saying not terribly coherent things showed up. And then were immediately deleted when some of them were called out. And I'm like, wait, the person you're claiming to be is not who you are. So that just screams some scam artist trying to spread FUD for whatever reason, right? Also, other people have looked into FPGA acceleration of various things. The big problem is FPGAs aren't really much faster than GPUs. Like, you don't really get that much. They're fast, but they're losing out. The circuits they make are not nearly as small as GPUs are. So anything that a GPU can do worth a damn, it will tend to kick an FPGA ass at. Yes, so that appears to be a total nothing. There is some interesting stuff going on where people are looking into, hey, if there was somebody grinding on the network, what would that look like, right? And doing this kind of interesting question of, hey, can we look for pools or, well, farming rewards of whatever kind, some singleton payout thing that's getting, that's basically never getting repeat, that's basically never getting repeat plots, finding rewards on it, which is a very interesting thing to look into. And I think they are finding some that seem to be doing this. The thing is, this does not necessarily mean that someone has a grindy farm. It could just mean that they are following the thing that I originally told people is just kind of a good idea, which is whenever one of your plots wins a block, it's kind of nice to destroy it. The reason for this might be totally unnecessary, but it's kind of nice when something makes a block, you want to remove the possibility that there could be a reorg over that one for all time. And the best way to do that is just throw away the key associated with that plot. So it's just not touchable anymore. So just laws of physics says we can't reorg past that point. So that's just a nice thing to do. So there may be people who just have scripts set up to do that. So that's an interesting thing to see anyway.
Most certainly. Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate the overview of the two different attacks there, and then also a dive into that great community effort to look and try to determine what grinding might appear as on the chain itself. And we are at the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and wrap things up, but I'd like to wrap it up with one last question. And today we discussed how different community members have participated in the discussions for designing the new proof of space and plot format. But Dr. Nick, as somebody who was a community member and is now part of the CNI team, and you've seen both sides of the coin, what are your perceptions as to how community members can be more involved in the development or planning stages for the new plot format? And of course, we have the chip coming up soon that'll help in that regard.
Yeah, sure. So it's difficult to find someone to help with the actual like proof of space design because there's very few members that knows what's happening. And that was one of the conversations I was trying to have with Dr. Yang, was to see how much does he know about this, but there were some weaknesses there, and so it's difficult to cooperate with someone that's then not cooperating back in such a great way. And then in terms of farmers, what is difficult for me to sometimes evaluate is across all the different levels of farmers, like what is, for example, an appropriate level of hard drive load that they want to have on their systems, because the higher we push that load, the more compression resistance we can get. And so that feedback from farmers is important to me in terms of like, hey, would you like to compromise some compression resistance, but then have your farm just be like completely idle most of the time, or will you accept the load going up to like 2% or 4%? Or in terms of this Bish compression, like, how would you feel if that went up to 10% load, but then you have the same format across SSD and hard drive, and we don't have to play with those two different formats. So that's really the kind of the black art on what is comfortable for farmers. How long do they want to be able to plot for? How long do they not want to ever plot again? And all these variables there. And that's why I'll be releasing this plot tool, so that they can actually tweak and then start conversations about it and see what effects they have on the plot format when they say, no, I want my lower hard drive load. Well, then I'll be like, okay, you're going to expose a little bit more risk over here, or you're going to drop the rental attack costs down over here. And so that's going to be a lot of back and forth that I'm looking forward to, so that I don't have to answer all those just like by myself, or try to figure out with Bram, like what do farmers want, because we can just ask you guys at that point.
Yeah, thank you very much, and definitely a great opportunity for farmers. And I know not only can they discuss such topics inside of the plot format discussion thread inside of our Discord, but once that chip is released, they will also have the chip repo on GitHub in order to provide their feedback as well. We are past the top of the hour, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap things up. But I really wanted to thank you, Bram, and thank you, Dr. Nick, for taking the time today to present more information about the plot format plans and where we're at currently in the process. Feel free, any of the participants, if you have follow-up questions, to jump inside of our Discord server and ask them inside of that plot format discussion thread. If you need help figuring out where that's at, feel free to reach out to one of our mods and they can definitely help you in that regard. But thank you both for your time today. Thank you to the participants, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.